When Deathworlder Cadets saved a species the galaxy left behind, the Forgotten World. The cold blue glow of hyperspace illuminated the cadets' briefing room aboard the UGS Resolute, a towering starship that served as both an academy and a proving ground for humanity's best and brightest. The cadets, though young, bore the confidence and sometimes recklessness of humanity's unique place in the galactic community. Humans were a paradox to the galaxy, fragile compared to the hulking Zarek, yet far more adaptive, prone to injuries, but also to feats of survival that seemed impossible to species born on temperate core worlds. They were feared and respected in equal measure, earning them the nickname Deathworlders, a term referring to their origin on Earth, a planet deemed highly dangerous by galactic standards. Cadet Commander Isla Voss stood at the head of the briefing table, her crisp uniform contrasting her wild, unkempt auburn hair. Her piercing green eyes scanned the room. Around her, the team of cadets she'd come to think of as family sat in uneasy silence. The Galactic Council has officially declared Erythra a non-viable protectorate, Isla said, her voice steady but laced with tension, which is bureaucratic speak for we don't care if they die. A hologram flickered to life at the center of the table, displaying Erythra, a once lush planet now reduced to an ash-colored husk. The remnants of cities dotted its surface, but none appeared operational. The Resolute had been dispatched to survey what was left of the native population, the Azari, an insectoid race whose civilization had crumbled after a series of galactic missteps. Isla continued, her voice rising slightly. The Azari were technologically primitive but rich in biological diversity. They were exploited for genetic samples, then abandoned when their ecosystems collapsed under the strain. Cadet Enzo Callahan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. His smirk didn't reach his hazel eyes. And now the council wants to make sure their mess doesn't spread to anyone else. Typical. The room muttered in agreement. While humans were new to galactic politics, they had quickly earned a reputation for questioning the moral fiber of decisions made by the Galactic Council. Erythra was just another example of a planet left behind because it no longer held economic value. What's the mission? Cadet Mirad Sai asked, her soft voice carrying an edge of determination. The daughter of diplomats, Mira had an uncanny ability to sense hidden motives, and she knew there was more to this than a simple survey. Isla nodded at the question. The council insists this is a recon mission. Observe the Azari, confirm their extinction or assess their remaining population, then report back. No direct intervention. Her gaze hardened, but command gave us discretion in the field. The room grew quiet. Discretion was a dangerous word. It meant command trusted their judgment but wouldn't officially protect them if they stepped over the line. Let me guess, Enzo said, tilting his chair on its back legs. They don't want us bringing back any survivors. Officially, no, Isla replied. Unofficially, you know how this goes. The ship's PA system buzzed, and the captain's voice filled the room. Cadet team, prepare for orbital descent. We'll reach Erythra in 20 minutes. Isla dismissed the team with a sharp nod. Gear up, we'll split into 2 squads for the surface. Keep your comms open, and no one plays hero unless we all agree on the plan. 20 minutes later, the cadets were strapped into the dropship, its interior vibrating as it plummeted through Erythra's atmosphere. Outside the narrow viewport, dark clouds swirled like bruises against the sky. Lightning illuminated jagged terrain below, scarred from centuries of exploitation. Atmospheres barely breathable, Mira noted, her helmets display feeding her environmental data. We'll need filtration masks. Enzo smirked. This place makes Earth look like a vacation spot. As they descended, the remains of a city came into view. It was a sprawling ruin of broken towers and collapsed tunnels, overrun by thorny vegetation. What stood out most were the skeletons. Miles of insectoid remains scattered across the land. Deathworlder Cadets, Enzo murmured. Welcome to Deathworld 2.0. The dropship landed with a jarring thud, and the cadets disembarked. Isla led the way, her pulse rifle slung across her back. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of their equipment. Their objective was simple: survey the ruins, scan for any Azari survivors, and leave. Yet, As they ventured deeper into the city, Isla couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Myra's scanner chirped. I'm picking up movement. Small, fast, southeast quadrant. The team froze. Isla raised her hand for silence, then gestured for them to follow. They moved as one, their training taking over. The source of the movement wasn't hard to find. In a hollowed-out building, huddled among the debris, was a group of Azari. They were gaunt and frail, their exoskeletons dull and cracked, but their dark eyes glimmered with intelligence and fear. Isla's breath caught. These weren't mere stragglers. There were dozens of them, including children. They're alive, Mira whispered. Her voice carried both awe and horror. How did they survive? The question hung in the air as the Azari regarded the humans warily. Isla knelt slowly, lowering her weapon. She extended a hand, palm up, a universal gesture of peace. We're not here to hurt you, she said softly, knowing they wouldn't understand the words but hoping they'd sense the intent. One of the Azari, larger than the others and bearing scars that suggested it was their leader, stepped forward. It clicked its mandibles in a rhythmic pattern, its body trembling but defiant. We need to report this, Enzo muttered, but his tone lacked conviction. We can't just leave them here, Mira shot back, her voice rising. The council will never help them. They'll die if we don't do something. Isla stared at the Azari leader, then at her team. The cadets' faces reflected the same conflict raging inside her. Obey orders, or risk everything to save a species the galaxy had abandoned. Her decision came swiftly. We make contact, she said. If the council won't act, then we will. The team exchanged tense glances, knowing the weight of Isla's words. Their actions could save a species or condemn them all. Alliance of the Forgotten. The Azari leader's mandibles clicked again, slower this time, as it cautiously approached Isla. Its movements were jerky, as if every step required immense effort. The other Azari huddled close together, their hollow eyes fixed on the humans. Mira stepped forward, lowering her scanner. Their biochemistry is fascinating, adapted to survive on barely anything. But they're starving. Isla, they won't last long. Isla nodded, still crouched. Slowly, she pulled out a ration bar from her pack and set it on the ground. The Azari leader hesitated, its eyes darting between Isla and the offering. Then, with deliberate precision, it extended a spindly limb and retrieved the bar. It sniffed the item before breaking a small piece and tasting it. The reaction was immediate. The leader's clicks grew louder, and the others chirped in unison. Relief and cautious hope rippled through the group. The Azari were not only desperate, they understood the gesture of aid. They're intelligent, Mira whispered, far more than the council gave them credit for. Enzo rolled his eyes. Of course, they are. The council only cares about their spreadsheets and profit margins. These poor guys were expendable the second their planet stopped being useful. We don't have time for a galactic ethics debate, Isla said, rising to her feet. We need to establish communication, figure out their needs, and decide our next move. The Azari leader clicked again, pointing at Isla's pack. It seemed to understand the humans were their only lifeline. Isla gestured to her team to distribute the remaining rations. The Azari devoured them with heartbreaking urgency. Back at the dropship, the cadets set up a makeshift command center. Mira worked tirelessly on her translator device, adapting it to process the rhythmic clicks of Azari communication. Meanwhile, Enzo and another cadet, Raji, scouted the surrounding area for supplies and signs of danger. This city is barely holding together, Raji muttered as they climbed over a collapsed wall. The storms are tearing it apart. Even if we save them, how do we get them out of here? That's the million-credit question, Enzo replied. But I'll tell you this much, leaving them here to die isn't an option. As they scanned the horizon, Enzo's helmet detected movement. A dozen shapes flickered on his HUD, closing in fast. He froze, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. Raji, he said quietly, we've got incoming. In the Azari shelter, Isla was watching the leader when Myra's translator beeped. She adjusted a few settings, then activated it. The device emitted a synthesized voice that mimicked the Azari's clicks. "You, helpers?" the translator relayed. The voice was distorted but understandable. Isla's heart raced. It was a breakthrough. "Yes," she said clearly, "we want to help." The leader tilted its head, then clicked again. "Helpers, not come before. Why now?" Isla swallowed hard, knowing there was no easy answer. "We weren't allowed to come before. We're here now because we care." The leader's mandibles twitched, a gesture Mira hypothesized was skepticism. "You leave us?" it asked, its tone wary. Before Isla could respond, her comlink crackled. "Commander," Enzo's voice came through, sharp with urgency. "We've got hostiles heading your way. They're armed, and they're not Azari." Isla's blood ran cold. She signaled to the team to prepare for a fight. "Hold them off, Enzo. We're securing the civilians." "Copy that. Raji and I will delay them as long as we can." Enzo and Raji took cover behind a crumbled barricade as the figures drew closer. They weren't Galactic Council operatives, they were scavengers, armed with crude but deadly plasma rifles. These mercenaries likely saw Erythra as a salvage jackpot. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Raji asked, checking her rifle's power level. "That they're here to strip this place clean and won't hesitate to put us in the ground?" "Yeah, I'm thinking that," Enzo replied grimly. As the scavengers opened fire, the cadets returned shots with precise bursts. The firefight was chaotic, plasma bolts lighting up the dark ruins. Enzo's voice crackled over the comlink. "Isla, we're outnumbered here. 5 minutes, tops." Back at the shelter, Isla made a snap decision. She turned to Mira. "Get the Azari ready to move. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." Mira nodded and relayed instructions to the Azari leader via the translator. The clicks came faster now, urgency replacing caution. The Azari understood the danger and began gathering their young and injured. Isla activated her comlink. "Enzo, fall back to the shelter. We're evacuating." "Copy that," Enzo shouted over the sound of plasma fire. "But they're not gonna make it easy." The cadets fought their way back, using debris as cover. By the time they reached the shelter, the scavengers had regrouped and were closing in. "They're coming in hot," Enzo warned, panting. "What's the plan?" Isla gestured to the dropship. "We get everyone on board and take off." "Mira, how many Azari can we fit?" Mira hesitated. "All of them, but the ship wasn't designed for this. It's gonna be tight." "Tight's better than dead," Isla snapped. "Move." The cadets formed a defensive line as Mira and Raji ushered the Azari into the dropship. Plasma fire rained down on them, but the cadets held their ground, using their superior training to outmaneuver the scavengers. As the last of the Azari boarded, Isla shouted, "Enzo, Raji, fall back, now!" The two cadets sprinted for the dropship, diving inside as Isla hit the hatch controls. The door sealed shut just as a plasma bolt scorched the exterior. The ship shuddered as it lifted off, engines straining under the extra weight. Inside the cramped cabin, the Azari huddled together, their fear palpable. Isla looked at her team, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. They had disobeyed direct orders, engaged in combat, and now carried a ship full of refugees. "We did the right thing," Mira said softly, as if reading Isla's mind. Isla nodded, but her jaw tightened. "Now comes the hard part, figuring out where to take them. The council's going to come down on us hard for this." Enzo leaned back against the wall, his smirk returning despite the chaos. "Let them try. They don't know what it means to fight for something worth saving." As the dropship broke through Erythra's atmosphere, Isla glanced at the Azari leader. Their dark eyes met, and she saw something she hadn't expected: trust. The price of defiance. The hum of the dropship's engines was a fragile thread of calm as Isla and her team rocketed away from Erythra's surface. Cramped inside the ship, the Azari refugees sat in eerie silence, their gaunt faces betraying the immense strain of their ordeal. Isla clenched the armrests of her seat, her thoughts racing as Mira struggled to stabilize the overloaded ship. "How bad is it?" Isla asked, her voice low but firm. Mira glanced at her console, sweat beading on her brow. Engines are running hot, we'll make it to orbit, but I wouldn't push it much further. Where are we going? Enzo asked from the co-pilot seat, his tone unusually serious. We can't just float around with a ship full of refugees. The Council will have patrols crawling all over this sector. Isla's mind churned through options, each more desperate than the last. They couldn't return to the Resolute. Command would never allow them to harbor the Azari, and heading for an allied world meant risking interception. There's a derelict station in the outer ring, Mira said, her voice tentative. It's old, abandoned, shouldn't have any traffic. We could regroup there, figure out our next move. Isla nodded. Plot the course. Enzo, keep an eye on our six. If anyone's following us, I want to know before they're in range. As Mira adjusted their trajectory, Raji leaned over from her seat. Even if we get there, what then? We can't stay hidden forever. We'll figure it out, Isla said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Right now, survival is the mission. The derelict station, Outpost Theta 7, loomed in the void like a forgotten relic. Once a bustling trade hub, it had been abandoned decades ago, its systems powered down and its corridors left to gather dust. The cadets docked cautiously, their dropship's engines sputtering as they shut down. Inside the station, the air was thin but breathable. The Azari huddled together as the team led them through dim, labyrinthine corridors. The station creaked ominously, its structural integrity questionable at best. This place gives me the creeps, Enzo muttered, sweeping his rifle in slow arcs as they advanced. Isla ignored him, focusing on their immediate needs. Mira, get power to the life support systems. Enzo, Raji, secure the perimeter. We're exposed here. The cadets worked quickly, their training kicking in despite the mounting pressure. Mira managed to bring partial power back online, bathing the station in flickering lights. The Azari, though exhausted, began exploring their temporary haven with cautious curiosity. Hours later, the team gathered in a makeshift command room. Mira had linked their systems to a nearby relay, scanning for any incoming transmissions. Her face darkened as she turned to the group. We've got a problem, she said. The Council's issued a sector-wide alert. They're calling us rogue operatives and demanding our immediate surrender. Enzo let out a low whistle. Well, that didn't take long. They're really putting the screws to us. Isla felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She had expected consequences, but the speed and scale of the Council's response made it clear they wanted this incident buried. The Azari weren't just abandoned, they were erased. They're trying to scare us into compliance, Isla said, but they don't know us. Raji crossed her arms. This isn't just about us anymore. If they catch us, the Azari are done. Myra's console beeped, interrupting the discussion. Incoming transmission, she announced, her voice tight. A holographic display flared to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Nyrus, a high-ranking council officer. Her expression was icy, her silvery uniform immaculate. Cadet Commander Isla Voss, the Admiral said, her voice cold as the void. You are in violation of Galactic Council protocols. You have engaged in unauthorized combat, seized prohibited cargo, and endangered interstellar stability. Surrender immediately, or face the consequences. Isla straightened, her jaw tight. The prohibited cargo you're referring to is an entire species. You left them to die. Nyrus's eyes narrowed. The Azari were deemed unsustainable. Your actions jeopardize the balance of the Galactic Compact. This is your final warning. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the room in silence. Enzo leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning. She sounds nice. She's not bluffing, Mira said. The Council's fleet is massive. We can't fight them head-on. Then we don't, Isla replied, her voice steady. We stay mobile, find allies, and make this public. If the galaxy sees what the Council has done, they'll have to answer for it. Their respite on Theta 7 was short-lived. Barely a day had passed when Myra's scanners picked up an approaching Council patrol. The team scrambled to prepare for another escape, but the Azari leader stopped Isla as she issued orders. Why, save us, the leader asked through the translator. Its tone was heavy with both gratitude and confusion. Isla met its gaze, her voice soft but firm. Because it's the right thing to do. No one else stood up for you, so we did. The Azari leader clicked thoughtfully, then extended a claw-like appendage, a gesture of trust and solidarity. Isla clasped it briefly, the weight of their survival pressing harder on her conscience. The Council patrol reached the station within hours, their sleek warships bristling with weapons. The cadets barely escaped, the dropship's engines sputtering as it tore away from Theta 7. Plasma fire streaked past them, and Mira worked frantically to plot another jump. We can't keep running forever, Raji said, her voice strained. We're running out of fuel, food, and options. Isla stared out the viewport at the fleeing stars. She knew Raji was right, the galaxy was vast, but the Council's reach was nearly endless. Then we stop running, Isla said finally. We find a way to fight back. Her team stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. They weren't just cadets on a rogue mission anymore, they were rebels, standing against the most powerful force in the galaxy. As the dropship vanished into hyperspace, Isla's mind raced with possibilities. Somewhere out there, she had to find allies, species and factions who would stand against the Council's tyranny. But for now, survival was enough. The Azari were alive, and for Isla, that was reason enough to keep fighting. The stand for the forgotten. The UGS Resolute floated in the depths of the Outer Rim's shadow, a pocket of space where rogue factions and forgotten worlds lingered. The battered dropship carrying Isla and her team docked within the ship's concealed hangar, its engines sputtering as it powered down. The cadets had returned not to seek refuge but to ignite a rebellion. Isla, now wearing the expression of someone who had accepted the gravity of her choices, strode into the makeshift war room her team had hastily assembled. The Azari leader followed her, its mandibles twitching as it observed the holographic map of Council-controlled space. We've got one shot, Isla began, addressing her team and the few sympathetic junior officers who had agreed to help. The Council's fleet outnumbers us 1,000 to 1, but this isn't just about firepower, it's about exposing their crimes. Mira adjusted the map, highlighting a location deep within Council space, the Nexus Archive, she explained. It's where the Council stores all classified records, genetic samples, ecological data, and everything they've done to the Azari. If we can get the evidence, Isla said, and broadcast it to the galaxy, the Council won't be able to bury the truth. We'll rally other species to our side. Enzo leaned back, his arms crossed. And what happens when their fleet shows up to turn us into space dust? Isla's gaze hardened. Then we make sure the galaxy knows what we're fighting for. Rallying allies. The first step was finding reinforcements. Mira had been working tirelessly on encrypted channels, sending distress signals to fringe factions, outlaws, independent traders, and even sympathetic planetary leaders. Their first success came from an unexpected source, the Zarek, a warrior species known for their unyielding pride. Commander of Kraz, a towering figure covered in gleaming scales, stood aboard the Resolute's bridge as the holographic transmission stabilized. You risk much, Deathworlder, Kraz rumbled. The Council is a hydra, and your rebellion but a single blade. Isla met his gaze without flinching. The Council left the Azari to die. If they'll do it to one species, they'll do it to others. How long before they decide the Zarek are unsustainable? Kraz's mandibles clicked in thought. We do not fight for the weak, but we respect those who fight with honor. We will stand with you, for now. As more transmissions came in, the tide began to turn. A fleet of patchwork ships, a ragtag armada of those who had suffered under the Council's rule, began to gather. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a stand. The raid on the Nexus Archive. The fleet's approach to the Nexus Archive was anything but subtle. The Council's security forces were ready, their gleaming ships forming an impenetrable wall around the station. The cadets knew they couldn't win through brute force. This mission required strategy. Enzo, you're on diversion duty, Isla said as the team reviewed their plan. Draw as many of their ships away as you can. Finally, Enzo grinned. Something fun. The dropship launched from the Resolute, its engines blazing as it darted through enemy lines. Enzo's reckless maneuvers and well-timed plasma volleys lured several Council frigates into pursuit, leaving a gap in their defenses. Squad Alpha, move now, Isla barked. The remaining cadets piloted a stealth shuttle directly toward the station. Mira worked furiously at the controls, bypassing layers of security as alarms blared around them. Inside the station, the team moved with precision. Isla led the way, her pulse rifle raised as Mira accessed the mainframe. Raji guarded the rear, holding off advancing Council troops with bursts of suppressive fire. "I've got it," Mira shouted, pulling a data core from the terminal. "This has everything, proof of the Azari's exploitation, the genetic harvesting programs, and every planet they've abandoned." "Then let's finish this," Isla said, her voice cold with determination. The final stand. The fleet outside was in chaos. Enzo's diversion had worked longer than expected, but the Council reinforcements had finally arrived. The makeshift armada of rebels and Deathworlder cadets stood little chance against the overwhelming firepower bearing down on them. On the bridge of the Resolute, Isla coordinated their defense. "We need time to broadcast the data. Hold the line at all costs." Kraz's warship led the charge, its hull glinting as it rammed into a Council destroyer. The Zarek warriors boarded the enemy vessel, buying precious minutes for Mira to complete the upload. Isla's voice rang over the comms. "To everyone listening, this is our stand. We're fighting for the Azari, for every species the Council has silenced. Join us, or watch as the galaxy falls into darkness." The transmission went live, and the stolen data flooded the networks. Across the galaxy, beings of all species watched in horror as the truth unfolded. Protests erupted on core worlds, and neutral factions began to rally to the cause. But the Council was not willing to go down quietly. Their flagship, a massive dreadnought, bore down on the Resolute, its cannons charging for a devastating volley. "We won't make it," Mira whispered, her hands trembling on the console. Isla stood tall, her voice unwavering. "Then we make sure they remember this day." The turning point. As the Council dreadnought prepared to fire, a new fleet emerged from hyperspace. Ships bearing the insignias of neutral planets and allied species surged into the fray, their weapons blazing. The tide turned as the Council's forces, caught off guard, began to falter. Isla's comlink crackled with a transmission. "This is Chancellor Belair of the Coalition of Free Worlds. We've seen your transmission, Commander Voss. You're not alone." Relief swept through the cadets as the reinforcements pushed the Council's fleet into retreat. The Nexus archive was destroyed, and with it, the Council's hold over its darkest secrets. Epilogue. Weeks later, the galaxy had changed. The Council's power had fractured, its authority challenged by a growing coalition of free species. The Azari, now under the protection of the Coalition, began to rebuild on a new world. Isla stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the stars. The cost had been high, lives lost, futures sacrificed, but the Azari were alive. For Isla, that was victory enough. Enzo joined her, his trademark smirk softer now. "You know, for a bunch of cadets, we didn't do half bad." Isla smiled faintly. "We're not just cadets anymore.